Okay, so moving on to our next part, directly related to Sean's presentation. Today we've got Ant, Christy, Ashley, Adrian, and Sean on the panel. And we're trying out a new format with this panel. Instead of submitting questions ahead of time, I would love for you to submit questions now that you have about learning analysis. I also have a few already that were submitted, but just anything in general about learning analysis that you may have. So we'll start off with a couple of the ones that I've got, and in the meantime, maybe they'll spark some questions that you have. You know, one of the things that you mentioned, Sean, was the observation piece in the learning analysis and interviewing employees. So I wondered, you know, what percentage of companies you work with actually allow you to observe on-the-job tasks? And that's a question for anyone on the panel that has thoughts about that. If that's a practice that you get to do a lot, or if it's kind of harder to do that, or any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess if I start, I mean, there's probably sorry, I don't know what the percentage is. I'll start with that. But I guess the answer is, I mean, if you're invested in doing the learning analysis, generally I've found it's pretty safe in terms of, you know, the same as design. You sign an NDA, you can take these type of discussions. And if they're going to share things like their business metrics with you and operational metrics, for sure they're going to let you observe what they do. So I don't think it would be a major issue. The only thing I would say is you don't necessarily have to do it either. There is an option, and especially if it's things like field work or where there's a large number of employees and you just physically wouldn't be able to do it anyway, is delegate the task to their own employees. So if you provide lists of things to observe, such as a behavior, or, you know, if it's a behavior, or if it's how many times they ask their colleagues questions, or whatever the metrics is, because so many industries are all very different. But ensuring that they all do it in the same way, I think that's the critical part. That can save maybe having to go down that route of doing all observation yourself.
So that is really great. That kind of ties into Christy's question, which is how do you do observations if you're working remotely? And so it sounds like, you know, you're just giving them a list of questions to ask to make sure that you get the same data types back. Any other comments on doing observations or doing observations remotely? Does anybody do surveys, or are some of you actually going out and visiting the sites a lot?
I think from my perspective, the size of the projects I've been working on so far are nowhere near big enough to warrant this type of in-depth learning analysis. And it's something that I'm definitely pushing my clients to think about more thoroughly. I think when clients often come to me, and I think this is probably the same for a lot of freelancers, they've already self-diagnosed that they need the e-learning course, and they're not really looking at us as the experts for diagnosing that the e-learning course is the solution. They're coming to us and they've already pre-diagnosed that that's the solution, and we're just there as hired help to build the solution for them. I think what you presented there, Sean, is exactly how it should be. We should be, as learning professionals, going in and doing some evaluation before coming up with the solution, which I think we discussed last week may lead us to, you know, have less work, because we might identify that an e-learning course isn't always the right solution, or a full e-learning course is not going to be, you know, as effective as some other forms of training or other solutions. So from my perspective, I think what I'm trying to say is that whilst that, you know, seeing that full spectrum of what you would do in a sort of perfect scenario, I would find it very difficult to apply that to a lot of my clients, because the projects are a lot smaller, and therefore, you know, I'm sure that some of my projects that I've worked on, the cost of building the e-learning will be less than actually doing that analysis in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does make a difference. Definitely the size of the project. And, you know, I'll also...
Just to try and answer that a little bit as well is,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to, even if you had, you know, half a day or one day to do your analysis, I think it's good to have at least your own process or structure for how you do your analysis. So even in your head, you know, you're going to have a 1 hour customer workshop. In your head, have the idea that, okay, I'm going to get through the kickoff meeting in the first half hour, and then we're going to do half an hour on line of sight. So it's not really the full depth that you might want, but at least you're kind of going through the stages. And it might give you an opportunity then to expand that later with the same customer or other customers as you get more used to it, maybe.
Yeah, I think you take on. I think I could still definitely follow that process that you've outlined there. It doesn't need to be as granular maybe as you've gone through if it's a smaller project, but there's still a definite sort of checklist of items that you need to follow before you can even start thinking about designing slides, or, you know, what software you're going to use, or how the content's going to look. And I think that takes a lot of confidence to approach a client who's come to you and said, I'm prepared to give you X $1,000 to build an e-learning course. At that point, for you to say, well, hang on a minute, let's go back a step. Before you give me all that money to build your e-learning course, I need to do a full, you know, needs analysis. And I think, you know, from my perspective, I've started trying to do what I call like I think in W freelancing rate, they call it a road mapping session. Sell them on a smaller product, exactly what you're talking about, Sean. Sell them the needs analysis as a service, and that will act as a great kind of introduction because it shows that you're the expert. It really gives them the ability to identify what the root cause of the problem is. You initiate the relationship with a smaller product rather than selling them a full course to begin with. You're just selling them sort of more like a short 2 hour consultancy session. And after that, they can go away and they can decide that, okay, well, we know more about what we need to create from our problem. We don't necessarily have to use Ant, but he's, you know, somebody who we can use. But now we've gained that education and that information, we can go and choose whoever we like to build the course. So I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think it's definitely important to build into the overall process.
Ant, sorry, can I just follow up on what you've been saying? I agree with you with small projects. I start with a little questionnaire, which I like to send to start with and get the customer thinking about some of the topics that we want to talk about. And I feel that if they have the opportunity then to think about these ideas, which they probably haven't thought about, the real benefits and needs and metrics and, you know, the actual design, they just think, for me, I'm doing product training, so they just want their audience to know about new features. End of story. But in giving them a questionnaire and then following it up with, you don't have to fill all the questions out, let's talk about it in a couple of days' time, I feel that does open them up more to more of this analysis process, even though you don't often go all the way with all the different steps of it. I do find it helps to open them up.
And just kind of to follow up with that, one of the questions that Adrian had was, you know, how many companies have taken up this service? So has anyone actually offered learning analysis as a service, just standalone? Or is it, I mean, I think for most of us, it's usually wrapped in with a project if we do it, but anybody out there?
So I have sold it sometimes, generally not in a situation where we know where it's pretty clear cut. I've done it in situations where the need was so vague that I frankly didn't feel like I could tell them the scope and even give them an estimate until I did some sort of analysis. There are certainly, I mean, I do feel like I'm in that same kind of position as Ant and Adrian, where often it's a smaller project where this level of analysis wouldn't be there, you know, wouldn't make sense, or where it is something where, okay, well, this is a brand new policy. There isn't anything to absorb with the current stuff. You know, it's brand new policy or a brand new skill that nobody's ever been trained on before. Clearly, this is a training problem. This isn't just a just a motivation problem or a process problem or whatever. So I think there is, I do still do analysis with that. I think I could be more systematic about it. As Sean, you said, even if you're just doing it for yourself, I usually in my scope include, if it's for a smaller project, I include that analysis as part of my design document stage, which is my initial outline to make sure that everything's on tag. I've never had a client question me about doing a design document and outline at the beginning. And I know I just have to do the analysis and review all the documentation and the statistics and everything to get to that outline. And so I just don't even call it analysis in those situations. I've been okay selling shorter, please excuse the cat who has decided to join the call. But I have actually, if the scope is vague, and especially with clients who haven't really done online learning before, who haven't done any e-learning, and if they come to me and say, we know we don't have a clue, we know we don't know what we don't know, they've been fine with that. So I think it does matter who your client is, of how you pitch that to them. Although really, I think, Sean, there's a lot of things that I'm kind of mulling over your presentation and thinking, yeah, I could really do this analysis stuff better than I'm doing it right now. So I think I'm going to try to push myself to do this a little better.
Yeah, it seems like that's the kind of the consensus there, Christy. You're not alone. It's really interesting too. When I was at Chipotle, I did a lot of learning analysis, pretty much for almost all of the e-learning courses that I created there. And one of the ones that I talk about often, because it's one of my favorites, is we were losing a lot of money on ringing up sales properly, the cashiers. And so I looked to see, who had the highest cash handling audit score for the longest amount of time, found a store in Vegas that was the best, visited them, and literally worked that position, the cash position. Basically immersing myself in that, what made me create something that was well far and above if I had just taken someone else's experience and okay, I'm just going to do my normal, no learning analysis and just create an e-learning course about cash handling. This is how you use the point of sale system, blah, blah, blah. There are so many subtle things that I learned that made that course so much more effective. And so it's a little amount of time up front pays off in dividends. But like a couple of people have said, how do you convince someone of that? So just reading the chat. If anybody else has any thoughts, chime in.
One more question for Sean, if that's all right. Have you ever tied the results of an e-learning course or a training program after the course has been executed, tied those results back to your initial analysis, and how, sort of close the loop, and how did that look?
I've done that in a small way. Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Sorry. I have gone through that process, but not on a freelance basis. Not coming in as an external. I've only done it internally, working for a multinational essentially. And in that particular case, I think the real learning is in the evaluation. The implementation of the evaluation strategy. I think you really need to have either dedicated people for it or huge chunks of your own time to manage that evaluation piece and to manage the whichever approach you take, if it's quantitative or qualitative, but to really take that data and analyze it correctly and map it to what you're seeing from the training. I have gone through it, but I've seen it, but it takes a lot of people. It's teams of people to review all that data analysis and then tie it back in inputs for follow-on programs. I personally, I think if I was doing an evaluation program now, I would get a partner on board and utilize them. I think it's just a little bit too far out of the scope for me in terms of ID, especially from time, and then background and things like statistical analysis and real research.
And I've been thinking about, because I'm going through the W freelancing rate course right now. I haven't done it this way, but I've been thinking about, I wonder if you're doing that packaging where you're offering like a high level, a medium level, and a low level kind of options for the client, so that there's a more expensive thing. I think that some sort of analysis has to be even in your low level, as we've talked about, that you need to do at least something there. But you could do that. I've been wondering if I could add the follow-up evaluation as like the highest level, most expensive option for them to buy from me. Because right now I kind of list it as like an optional add-on, and I'm not packaging it, I think, as well. I sort of list it, and nobody's ever taken me up on it, so I'm not packaging it right. But I do wonder, I'm thinking about that in terms of the W freelancing rate, of thinking about having like the premium package that would include the evaluation. Because as Sean said, it's a lot of time to go back and review that. But to say, okay, 60 days after this is launched, let's go look at it and see if we accomplished things, and I'll go through all the data and I'll give you recommendations on anything that we should change in the course, and then we can decide from there if you want to do another contract for doing revisions. And I do wonder if there would be a way to sell it that way.
It's interesting you said that, Christy, because I just submitted a proposal this week, which I offered that as the premium tier option. So the third tier was going to be an additional module, which was like we were going to sort of send out, I suggested like 3 months after the course, which would be like, which would provide refresher training on the initial subject, but also provide us with results on whether that knowledge had been retained. But I've yet to find out whether they're interested. So it'd be interesting to hear. But yeah, interesting idea.
It would be an interesting idea, especially since so much is getting cut out of the training departments. If we could manage to tie it to their idea of success and wanting to help them demonstrate to the corporation that there is value in the training that's being done, and it's directed directed properly, and whether perhaps they do need a larger analysis, and maybe that would allow for the sale of the analysis as well.
Yeah,
that's an excellent point, Karen. I really like what you just said about, the training department is always viewed as an expense. And so anytime that you can prove, this is how we're helping save the company money or things like that. If we can partner with, I know when I was in a training department, if an independent learning consultant, that was going to build an e-learning course for me, also said, hey, I could provide this as well, that would be something that I would be interested in talking about. So, Christy, you should repackage it and let us know what happens.
Sean, can I ask, do you charge a different rate for the analysis compared to the development? And if so, is it more or less?
More. Yeah, probably 25% more, something like that. It's, I suppose I consider that more a kind of a consultative rate, and at least in our market here, a consultative rate would generally, get a little bit more. There's also probably, an on-site element as well. So I guess we can justify it a little bit that way. But I certainly see it in terms of the value chain. You're higher up on the value chain. Potentially making a lot more cost savings for the company because of what you're recommending. So that's how I would justify it.
And Karen asked if it's generally, do you just do like a flat rate? This is the amount that it costs for the learning analysis, or do you do it by the hour?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of value-based pricing advocates around here, but honestly, it's more of a daily thing for me. Charge a daily rate, and assess how long it's going to take. Yeah.
Perfect. And then Tammy has a question. Tammy, do you want to just say your question? If not, I'll say it out loud. I'll give you a second. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So she's asking, are we skipping the in-depth analysis because it's not usually included in the paid scope by the client? Is this more part of the upfront work to scope a project that can take a lot of time that may or may not pay off? So if anybody has any thoughts about that. Yeah, I think the big thing is convincing the client that they need it. And then also, like we've said, is the size of the project. I mean, I've seen the benefit in doing it even for one e-learning course, even when I'm not designing an entire curriculum, but convincing someone that they need to spend the money on it, that is, I think, the issue.
Maybe one point to add, and probably maybe to give kind of internal training teams and learning teams a bit more credit is, sometimes when they do come to us and say, I need this specific e-learning course and don't worry about anything else, it's because they've done rigorous analysis internally. They may not just have told us or articulated it in a way that we understood it. So I would definitely encourage people to not just presume it hasn't been done, but to really dig into, maybe it's been partially done, maybe they've done a lot of stuff, and you can, add some additional activities they could do if it was missed, or help them document it in a more structured way. But often this type of stuff is done. I mean, they need to get their budgets approved for the e-learning, so normally they'll have to document something along the way to get that approved. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. The fact that it could already be done and they really just need to outsource the actual development. Just partnering. Yeah. Okay. Another question that we've got is, what are some questions that you use in the analysis process, or is there a certain, process that different people use? So a process that I use is Kathy Moore's action mapping, the 4 steps. What is a measurable business goal? Step 1, what do we need people to be able to do? Design learning objectives or practice activities where they can practice that. And then, number 4, provide the minimum amount of information possible. So is anybody familiar with action mapping? Does anybody else use it? What are some ways that you do analysis? Any thoughts about those?
I'm probably doing a sort of action mapping. It's not exactly Kathy's words, but I often explain it to clients as it's backwards design. You start with the end in mind of the goal of what do they want to do. And then you work backwards to figure out, well, how are we going to assess whether or not they can do what we want them to do? And then from there, how are we going to have them practice the thing that we're going to assess? And from there, how do you want to do, what content is needed to support the practice exercises, which is very much, it's not quite the same language as Kathy Moore's action mapping, but it's the same kind of concept of that backwards design. And clients usually can understand that if you tell them that it's backwards design and starting with the goal in mind, they can get that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really good point, just starting with the end in mind. However you want to get to that, starting with the end in mind. So I put a poll in, how many people are familiar with action mapping, something I'm just interested in knowing. And I'll also put, I have certain project kickoff questions that I always start with, so I'll put that in the chat if anybody else has particular questions that they include in their learning analysis that might be helpful.
I'd be interested to hear any questions that you mentioned. Really great if you could share those.
You're cutting in and out a little bit there, Ant. What? Can you say that one more time? Or type it?
And it's frozen for me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
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 Maybe I'll just answer a question before it comes. Are you back, Ant? Okay.
I don't think yet.
Just a comment on the questions to ask. I've read action mapping a little bit, but I wouldn't say it's something I use. But there is a lot of full books around research questioning techniques. But one I really like is around, there's a lot of theory around kind of your cognitive bias in terms of answering questions. So, if you ask somebody, are you good at doing this? Their answer is, what they think they should answer, what they think they should be good at. They think they're worse than they actually are. So that there are techniques to ask questions looking for the same answer, just in a slightly different way. So, for example, one I like is in your department, how would you rate the skill level of communication? Is there any areas that your peers are particularly bad at? And these are valid questions that you're getting insight from the individual you're speaking to about them, even though they're not answering for themselves. I just find that topic quite interesting in terms of how we try and answer questions and how we really give the answers. So it's an interesting topic to research anyway, if you want to learn more about that.
Great suggestion. Any other thoughts or input on how you ask questions or your process that you use for learning analysis by anybody?
I could just chip in from doing product training. I'm already in quite a narrow field, Patty. So I just have a 3-point why, who, and how much. So the why introduces what is the need for the training, what benefits do they hope for guests from the training, and hence lead on to goals and learning objectives. The who is really important for me because that's the audience, and I need to know lots about the audience, which I find is the most important. So things like even the location, the language, the most important though thing is the assumed knowledge that they have, because for me that can then lead on to potentially creating a sort of basic or an introductory training course for them that they might not have thought about. They might not have thought about the technology that you need to know before you do this product training. And of course there's the how much, which is what is the budget, and also based on the audience, what is the size of the audience. No point in for me going to spend lots of money on a small audience or a training that is going to be end of shelf life in a few months' time, things like that. So really look at the budget and things around it.
Great suggestions. Anything else from
Adrian? Sorry.
Hey, backhand.
Yay!
A quick add to Adrian. I love that kind of the how much question. I think that's really, really important. And then the add-on that I would add to that is how important is it? Because again, if they're doing something a lot, but it's not actually important, versus the one big thing they have to do once a week, but it costs the company thousands. So that kind of criticality and importance is the fancy term I use in documentation for it. But how often they do it and how important it is to their performance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Okay, any final thoughts about learning analysis or any other final questions before we wrap up? Ant, you look like are you saying something?
No.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes, I guess my only last comment I was going to make is that I just wondered if anybody else feels sort of a professional responsibility to do a needs analysis before they start building e-learning. I know that whenever I have built e-learning, I know in the last year I've built e-learning for clients, and I've consciously decided not to get involved with needs analysis because they haven't really shown any interest in diagnosing. And I've thought to myself, you know what, for the amount of money I'm going to be getting paid for this, the amount of effort it's going to take, I haven't got the energy and the time to go into that side of things. So I'm just going to build it based on your requirements, on your suggestions of what you want the course to look like. Essentially, somebody coming to me and saying, here's a PowerPoint presentation, can you convert it into something sexy? I just wondered if anybody else had any kind of internal friction with making that decision, and how you overcome that.
So I wrote this blog post titled, "No, I won't tweak your PowerPoint." That literally actually is, and it is from, I have changed the details, but some of that dialogue is literally from an email that I sent to a client where he sent me actually a Keynote file, which I couldn't open and then had to deal with. But even once I got the thing, and it was this PowerPoint with stuff straight out of the employee handbook, literally copy and paste onto the slides.
Even if he's going to pay you handsomely, and it's not very much work for you.
And I pushed it back. What I ended up, I think, actually doing for that one, what he ended up hiring me for was I did a little prototype of what could be done with it, which ultimately they didn't have the budget for that project, and he may come back to me in the future, or he may not. I mean, this is somebody who I think really just wants to do check-the-box training, and so I probably, honestly, in spite of what my fictionalized blog post says, I probably actually won't end up working with this guy again, and I'm okay with that. I do sometimes just turn down. I try to turn those things down. I realize, okay, as always, if you aren't going to be able to buy groceries, if you don't take that job, take the job tweaking the PowerPoint slides. Don't miss your mortgage payment because you're holding to high ethical standards. But I mean, I do try to actually tell people, like, well, no, that's not really what I do. And I think, and for the most part, I have enough work that I can afford to do that. And I realize that that's not the case for everybody. But I think the goal is that you get yourself busy enough, you have enough work, and you have enough reputation that you can say no to those things. It is, again, it's part of that thing of, if you are just a service provider, then your job is to say yes to everything the client asks you. If you are a consultant, you have to say no sometimes. And that's one of those places where I feel like I have to say no.
Yeah, great thoughts there, Christy. And also, like you said, to just be like letting people know, like, the thing is that it just won't be that effective. And so what I do is I create effective, training. And so it's kind of a different thing. Okay, well, we're almost at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and close here. Great chatting with everybody. I'm sharing a couple of things in the chat area. So for next week, I have 2 volunteer panel slots open, although we're kind of making it a little bit more broad where everybody's kind of chatting, but it would be great just if a couple of other people would like to sign up. I put the link to sign up in the chat. And then also be thinking of some questions that you have that just come up in your daily, interactions as an independent learning professional, and bring those questions next week. We would love to chat about those questions. And then next meeting is again next week, same time, same place, February the 4th. And Adrian is saying that Learning Technology Show is in London next week, Wednesday, Thursday. So if you're going to be there, let him know. So it looks like Ant and Adrian both are going there. So look at that. That's fun. If anybody else is going, let me know. Also, in Denver in May, they have the ATD big meeting. I know that Ashley is coming. If anybody else is coming, I'm going as well. I'd love to know. Double my audience, Adrian. I love it. Okay, so I'll see everybody on Slack. If you're not already on Slack, put your email address in the chat. I will invite you. And have a wonderful week, everybody. It was so great to see you. Thanks again, Sean. You're the best. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Patty.
Happy Thursday. Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Sean.